The funeral flowers weren't even a thought because my grandmother wasn't dead. Yet, there I stood in her dark hallway, listening to my own parents and uncle aggressively dividing up her estate as if she were already in the ground. I had come home early from my military deployment unannounced, expecting a joyful family reunion. Instead, I found Grandma sitting alone in the shadows of the kitchen, tears streaming down her weathered face, while her own children violently argued over who would get her house and savings. The betrayal in the air was thick enough to choke on. But as I rushed to comfort her, preparing to storm into the living room and confront them, Grandma suddenly grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. She pulled me close, her tear-filled eyes instantly hardening into something cold and calculating, and whispered, "They don't know. Help me get revenge." The uniform fabric of my dress blues always felt heavy, but walking up the familiar gravel driveway of my grandmother's house, it felt like lead. My name is Amber. I am 27 years old, an active-duty military intelligence officer, and I had just stepped off a transport plane after a grueling 10-month deployment overseas. I hadn't called ahead. I wanted to surprise the one person who had always been my safe harbor. Stepping quietly through the unlocked front door with my duffel bag, the joyful reunion I'd rehearsed in my head instantly shattered. The house was dark, but a sharp, aggressive murmur echoed from the living room. It was my parents, Arthur and Evelyn, alongside my Uncle Bradley. I froze in the hallway as my mother's voice pierced the silence. "If we move her to the facility in Northbridge by Tuesday, we can list the property before the winter market dips." Creeping further into the shadows, I peered through the cracked door. My family members were hunched over the mahogany coffee table like vultures, aggressively flipping through financial ledgers, property deeds, and bank statements. They were systematically dividing up her estate, counting her savings, and treating her life's work like a clearance sale. My heart hammered against my ribs, but the true heartbreak waited in the kitchen. There, sitting completely alone in the dim light of the stove, was Grandma Beatrice. Tears were streaming down her deeply lined cheeks as she listened to her own children plan her exile. The anger inside me flared, hot and sharp, urging me to storm into that living room and tear those stolen documents right out of my parents' greedy hands. But before I could take a single step forward, Grandma Beatrice's hand shot out from the shadows. For an 80-year-old woman, her grip around my wrist was shockingly tight, grounding me instantly. I looked down, and through her tears, I saw an expression I had never witnessed on her face before. The helpless, broken old woman vanished, her eyes narrowed into a look of absolute steel. She pulled me close to her ear, her breath warm, but her words ice-cold, and whispered, "They don't know. Help me get revenge." Keeping our movements completely silent, she signaled for me to leave my heavy duffel bag tucked away in the pantry. She then led me down the back hallway into her private bedroom, quietly turning the heavy brass key in the lock behind us. The moment the latch clicked, the fragile demeanor she had been projecting entirely slipped away. She walked over to her closet, pushed aside a row of vintage coats, and rolled back a section of the carpet to reveal a heavy, digital fireproof safe. As she punched in the code, she explained that she had been watching her children's rising greed for nearly a year. Inside the safe lay the real masterstroke, the actual, unencumbered titles to her estate, a massive, untouched stock portfolio, and a hidden ledger detailing decades of corporate secrets. They thought they were cornering a defenseless target, but Grandma was holding an entire arsenal. Leaving the locked bedroom, my military training took complete control. I took a deep, steadying breath, carefully schooling my expression into one of exhausted, naive joy. I walked back down the hallway, purposely heavy on my steps, and let my duffel bag drop to the floor with a loud, deliberate thud right outside the living room entrance. The frantic shuffling from inside was instantaneous. Papers were being violently shuffled into drawers, and folders were slammed shut as I stepped through the doorway. My parents and Uncle Bradley spun around, their faces frozen in a comical mixture of panic and forced delight. "Amber! Oh, my darling girl!" my mother shrieked, practically leaping across the room to throw her arms around me. Uncle Bradley stepped forward next, slapping me on the shoulder with an aggressive, over-the-top, jovial laugh that rang entirely hollow. They immediately transitioned into a masterclass of theatrical affection, asking a million questions about my flight, my health, and my safety, desperately trying to mask the financial treason they had been plotting seconds prior. I smiled warmly, hugging them back while letting a tear slip, pretending I was just a weary soldier overjoyed to be back in the arms of a loving, unified family. When they carefully brought up Grandma's failing health and suggested we should look over some legal papers to ease her burdens, I nodded enthusiastically. I played the naive daughter perfectly, subtly steering the conversation until they eagerly agreed to bring in their own attorney to draft a formal contract. The trap was set. The next morning, I put my background in military intelligence to work. While my parents and uncle were out celebrating their assumed victory over breakfast, I sat at Grandma's kitchen table with her lifelong trusted attorney, Mr. Sterling. Grandma had quietly summoned him at dawn, and together, we began digging deep into the financial underbelly of the people who raised me. It didn't take long for the ugly truth to surface. The desperation radiating from my family wasn't just born out of simple greed. It was driven by absolute impending panic. I watched the printer spit out page after page of certified financial forensics, each document exposing a mountain of hidden liabilities. Uncle Bradley was on the absolute brink of total ruin. His commercial real estate venture had collapsed into a fraudulent pyramid scheme, and he was staring down a string of aggressive lawsuits that would inevitably end in criminal bankruptcy. My parents weren't doing any better. In an effort to maintain the illusion of high society wealth, they had heavily leveraged their own assets, racked up crippling high-interest debt, and taken out a second mortgage they had no hope of paying back. They didn't just want Grandma's $1.5 million estate. They desperately needed it to shield themselves from legal destruction and public disgrace. They were running out of time, and they viewed their own mother as nothing more than a financial life vest to save their sinking ships. I filed the paperwork away cleanly, a cold smile forming on my face. It was time to give them exactly what they were begging for. The rain beat heavily against the living room windows as the family gathered around the mahogany table for what they believed was their crowning moment. My parents and Uncle Bradley sat shoulder to shoulder, trying desperately to suppress their triumphant smirks. Their personal attorney, a slick man named Mr. Carter whom they had hired to legitimize their scheme, laid out the legal transfer documents with practiced theater. They were pushing a pile of papers toward Grandma Beatrice, demanding she sign away the primary savings accounts and the deed to this very house. What they didn't know was that Mr. Sterling and I had intercepted those exact digital documents through Mr. Carter's assistant late the previous night. Utilizing their own lawyers' sloppy, rushed templates, we had seamlessly embedded a hidden, legally airtight poison pill clause deep within the fine print of the asset transfer schedule. By signing this contract to immediately seize the properties and accounts, the signees weren't just taking the physical bricks and mortar. They were legally executing an immediate, binding assumption of a massive, toxic private corporate liability and structural debt that Grandma had quietly funneled into those specific property lines weeks ago. Grandma Beatrice played her role flawlessly. She let her hand tremble slightly as she held the gold pen, wiping a theatrical, fragile tear from her cheek, while glancing around the room like a confused, defeated elderly woman. "If you all think this is truly best for my care," she whispered softly. My mother aggressively nodded, whispering false comforts. With one swift stroke, Grandma signed. The vultures instantly smiled, completely blind to the trap. 24 hours after the signing, I sat next to Grandma at the kitchen table, watching the morning sun break through the clouds. Right on cue, my mother's name flashed across my phone screen. When I answered and put it on speaker, the voice on the other end wasn't triumphant. It was pure, unadulterated hysteria. My mother was weeping, while in the background, Uncle Bradley was screaming obscenities at their lawyer, Mr. Carter. It turned out Mr. Carter had finally taken the fully executed documents back to his office to officially file them with the county registrar, only to actually read the underlying asset clauses we had seamlessly embedded. He had turned utterly pale. Through her gasping sobs, my mother finally blurted out the reality. "Amber, something is wrong. The lawyer says we didn't get the house or the savings. He says we just legally assumed over $2.2 million in toxic corporate debt." Grandma Beatrice didn't blink. She reached over, took the phone from my hand, and spoke with a chilling, absolute clarity that silenced the screaming on the other end instantly. "You wanted my estate," Grandma said smoothly, "and now you have it. Every single liability attached to it belongs to you." By signing that rushed contract, they had walked right into a financial firing squad. Because they had legally assumed those massive debts, their existing creditors immediately triggered default clauses on their personal assets. Within days, Amber stood by Grandma's side as we executed a total, permanent legal eviction, stripping them of any association with the true family trust and leaving them completely ruined by their own unchecked greed. With the toxic weight of my parents and uncle permanently severed from our lives, Grandma Beatrice and I didn't look back. I used a portion of my military leave to help her pack up her true, sentimental belongings, the small photographs, her favorite books, and the gold pen that had delivered her justice. Using her completely untouched, highly secure stock portfolio, we purchased a breathtaking coastal cottage overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Today, Grandma spends her mornings breathing in the fresh salt air and tending to a vibrant rose garden, completely free from the fear of betrayal. My parents and Uncle Bradley were forced to liquidate their luxury assets and enter corporate bankruptcy, entirely ruined by the very trap they had tried to set for her. If you were in my shoes, would you have ruined your own parents to protect your grandmother? What do you think of the poison pill strategy we used to trap the vultures? Comment below with the specific city or country you are watching from, so I can see how far Amber and Grandma Beatrice's story has traveled across the world.